Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Trades and Crafts in Medieval Manuscripts by Patricia Basing. This book, the cover is just a plain blue cover, so I'm showing the inside flap. And this book was absolutely fascinating. When I got it initially, because I had to order it from another library, I was initially maybe a little disappointed or apprehensive. I wasn't sure if this was going to be what I was looking for, but it wound up being really well done, and I really enjoyed this book, so I can highly recommend it. The title kind of explains what the book is about: trades and crafts in medieval manuscripts, and it is text accompanied by a lot of reproductions of art showing how trades and crafts were done in the Middle Ages. Now, when I first got this book, I was a little apprehensive because the vast majority of the art reproduced in this book is reproduced in black and white, and I personally love seeing the colors in the medieval art, so I was a little disappointed in that. It is a little bit older of a book, copyright in 1990, so again, a little older. There are some works in color though throughout the book, and I quickly realized though that the text was very fascinating. I learned so much reading this book. I anticipated reading it slowly over the course of a couple days, and I read it in like 2 sittings, one night before going to bed and the next night before going to bed, and I loved it. I learned so much. I was drawn in by the text. I feel like the text really shone in a book that I was expecting the art to shine, and the art was still really good, but I quickly forgot about the fact that the art was primarily reproduced in black and white. I just really enjoyed the text, and then the art just kind of accompanied the text with it. So I had a fantastic time reading it. Because of the size of this book, it's a little under 120 pages, I want to say. It is exactly 120 pages. The author cannot, of course, cover in depth every profession, every occupation that occurred in the Middle Ages. The author is looking to marry some art that can be found in text with some professions, common professions, roles in the Middle Ages, and just provide a brief introduction. And the book does move quite quickly. No profession is going to get more than a couple pages, but in this couple pages, the author does a really good job of concisely bringing the right amount of information to the reader. So I was highly impressed. I really enjoyed it, and it's actually quite a high quality book. Don't let the age of the book deter you. If you are able, I'm assuming it's out of print, but if you're able to pick this up secondhand for a really low price and you like medieval art or medieval history, this is a really fascinating book to add. And despite the cover being just plain blue, it's kind of pretty. So I would recommend adding this to your collection. Maybe there is like a relief cover. I know sometimes libraries take that off for protection because it'll get damaged being taken on and off the shelf. But yeah, this was an absolutely fascinating book. So let's go over the table of contents, and then I'll get into some of the more interesting stuff in this book. Right off the bat, there's the introduction where the author talks about what will and won't be covered. 1 or 2 things that are excluded from this book. The first being soldier's art. The author says that could be its whole separate section, which honestly is a topic I'm not too familiar with, so I'd be intrigued to get a book on that. The second is medical miniatures, which are covered a little bit at the end of this book, but the author references a colleague's book that she recommends that goes more into that in depth. So the introduction will just introduce you to what's going to be covered in the book and a little bit of necessary background information. Beyond that, the book is broken up into 4 sections, the first being agricultural and husbandry, so that's farming, horticulture, as well as livestock. The second is trade and commerce, which is merchants and fairs, as well as associated trades like banking and transportation. Then we have industry and crafts. That's metalwork, that's building, that's cloth, that's wool, that's leather, that's salt, that's glass, that's that sort of stuff. And then 4 is profession, which includes priests and other religious orders, including religious orders of men and women, as well as scholars, scribes, the law, and medicine, a little brief section at the end covering medicine. So overall, every single section was packed with information. I loved it. I felt like, again, the author never spent too much time on one particular section, but I did just want to point out some things that I learned from this book that I would love to dig into more. First of all, there's plenty of art. There's art on almost every single page, so you're never too far away from the art, even though it is in black and white. It really did not detract as much as I thought it would from the book. In the agricultural and husbandry section, a lot of these were pictures I had seen before as well. There is a lot of discussion on the importance of wool, sheep, which comes up in several of these chapters, which is something related to another book that I have read recently on the importance of wool in history. One of the more interesting things from agriculture and husbandry is the fact that women's domains were dairy and poultry, and I'm just intrigued as to how those two specific types of livestock were assigned to women, like what cultural history occurred to have specifically those two categories be women's domain as opposed to other things, maybe like ox, or pigs, that would be, I guess, men's domain. So that was just an interesting note. And that's the kind of thing that comes up and piques your interest that you can then dive into in a different sort of book. So I did really like the fact that the author kept things concise, but was able to introduce a wide range of things that I was able to learn quite a bit about. The next is on page 42, which is at the end, I believe, of the agriculture and husbandry. So something I didn't know was that tenants were required to grind their corn at a specific mill. You couldn't grind it yourself. That was something that wasn't allowed. I'm not sure where this applied. I'm sure not every single location in all of Europe was like that, but there was enough to the point where millers were kind of seen in a negative light because you were required to use their services and pay a fee, and they could be unethical. The example given in the book is Canterbury Tales, where the miller has a bad reputation due to unethical practices, but then people being forced to use his services because they weren't allowed to grind at home. And the little depiction given here depicts a woman using a mill, and the text says, "The woman illustrated in the Smithfield Decretals," which is the image I just showed you, "bringing her corn for grinding was not a satisfied customer. On the following page of the manuscript, she's shown setting fire to the mill," which that is one way to handle your situation. Arson, good old arson. So I did not know millers had such a negative consequence, and we can see at least one woman in one manuscript. Maybe, you know what, maybe it was the scribe's way of releasing a fantasy situation in which he burned down the local mill. We might not ever know. Some other additional interesting things in the industry and craft section, I learned about metalworkers and restrictions on their working hours. So metal workers were not always popular in towns due to the noises they made and the danger of fire. In 1394, the City of London authorities forbade blacksmiths to work at night, that is after 9 p.m. and after 8 p.m. in midwinter. And they also were subject to a lot of complaints. We have a complaint, an individual came to complain. His neighbor alleged that he had built a forge made of wood instead of the stone and plaster required by the city, which is of course a fire hazard. Regulations as precaution against fire. Adjacent to their house, the chimney of the forge was 12 feet too low. This guy was getting specific. The armorer's sledgehammers disturbed the plaintiff by day and night, shook their walls, and ruined the beer and wine in the cellar, while their house was foul and the smell of smoke from the sea coal used in the forge. Unfortunately, results of the case was not recorded. So metal workers also had a little bit of an iffy reputation, particularly working in the city. The author also points out areas in which the art shows technical errors. So in this case, an individual is striking the metal with the wrong end of the hammer. Some of this could just be a mistake in drawing, but the author also notes that sometimes things aren't accurately depicted because the person illustrating the manuscript might not be familiar with the craft in and of itself, like they might not have actually engaged in the craft, so they're just doing basically the best they can. Medical stuff is treated very briefly. If you look on page 114, we get a little bit into the medicine, although that's not heavily treated in this book. Something I found interesting is, members of religious orders were not allowed to perform surgery. Barbers wound up usually stepping in. That's how we get the Barber Surgeon Guild. And there was a strong emphasis on wanting to keep non-certified practitioners out, which is something that still occurs today. You want the person performing surgery to be board certified, to have gone to a reputable medical school, to know what they're doing and talking about. So this was something that was of course also a concern back in the Middle Ages, and they were very, very strict on this. They talk about a case where an individual had tried to represent himself as a physician and gave a little charm to a woman who was suffering from a fever, and the charm wasn't even, it was supposed to be Latin, but it wasn't even anything because he was illiterate. So there was a lot of work that went into trying to maintain the reputable reputation of the physicians. And of course, they are engaging in very common things like bloodletting, and here they're observing this individual as well. The theory of the four humors needing to be in balance was still at play at this point, but the medicine part is quite short because it can be treated much more fully in the other book mentioned. Overall, this was a very, very good book. Very surprising that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I expected. I did expect to enjoy it, but I expected to enjoy it like I expected this to be a solid 3.5, like an interesting read to read at night, and this was very enjoyable and I really recommend. So I'm glad that I got this book from the library. I'm glad that I ordered it in. I really enjoyed reading that, and I hope if you are looking for a book that discusses occupations and trades in the Middle Ages with an emphasis on manuscript art, I hope you check out Trades and Crafts in Medieval Manuscripts by Patricia Basing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.